Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Caruso, and I'm recording this video during the run-up to the 2024 presidential election. In fact, we're just days away as I record this. However, my hope is that the video will be applicable no matter when you watch it, because the Electoral College has become a subject of debate and great discussion today, and I want you to understand how it functions, um, where its roots are, and the importance of the Electoral College, why it's vital that we preserve it. Before you start watching the video, you should have access to print these little note sheets that go with it. And so go ahead and print those out. Pause me if you haven't done it already so that you can track with me as we go through the note sheets in this video. The last couple pages, you're going to find some blank Electoral College maps. And you can print out either a single sheet, or I have a double-sided version for you to print out and use on election night to track the Electoral College results as they come in that evening and perhaps the days following. Now, to get started, we're going to start where we should always start, and that's with the very firm foundation of Scripture. What I'm about to read to you are the words of Moses in Deuteronomy 1:13 through 15. And he said, "Choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men, and I'll appoint them as your heads." And you answered me, "The thing that you've spoken is good for us to do." So I took the heads of your tribes, wise and experienced men, and set them as heads over you, commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, commanders of fifties, commanders of tens, and officers throughout your tribes. Now, I hope what you've already sensed is that this is a civil government very different than the one that the people of Israel just left. In fact, very different than any pagan civil government system up to this time. What God is setting in place for his people is radically different, as one might expect. In fact, it's the world turned upside down. What was a pyramidal structure, it just helps us remember, that they had left in Egypt, right? Pharaoh was at the top. Whatever he said was the law. The same thing in other cultures around the Middle East. It was top-down structure, a tyrant or a dictator or a king who was at the top. Well, now here, what we see is that power will be distributed down to the smallest of structures, right? To commanders of tens and fifties. And that the people of God would choose from among themselves who would be their leaders. That imperative verb that you see there, choose, right? That implies a subject. Who is choosing? You, right? It implies you choose. You, the responsibility is with you to choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men. And I'll appoint them as your heads, Moses said. And then notice, you answered me. The people said to Moses, "That's a great idea. Yes, the thing you've spoken of is good." And so they chose these people, and Moses made them the heads over small groups of governing units, government units. So again, not government here with Moses, government here with the people. So guys, those three biblical principles of government that we pulled just from Deuteronomy 1:13 through 15 is that representation is chosen. So we have representation in a just government. Later, Algernon Sidney will say that very thing, a political philosopher who writes that the foundation of all just governments is representation. So local leaders are chosen. We see voluntary consent. Yes, the thing that you have proposed is good to us. And you see local self-government, that government, civil government, is distributed down to the local level, not held here at the top, okay? I should mention one other significant governmental principle that was introduced at the time that the Israelites were first establishing civil government at all, was that there would be a constitution, right? That they received a law that was higher than everybody. And it came from God. So it was an unchanging standard of law that applied to everybody. It was no longer that the Pharaoh spoke the law or that the king spoke the law and what he said was the law. No, there was a law that even was over the king. We see that again. If you want to go down that path, we'll take a government class with me. But Deuteronomy 17:18 through 20 discusses that very thing, that the king is to write for himself a book of the law so that he doesn't stray to the right or the left or think himself above his brethren, that he's above the law. So I mentioned that because what we're going to have in America, we're going to get a very unique system here. The Electoral College is a part of that incredible system, and its roots go all the way back to Deuteronomy 1:13 through 15, and Deuteronomy 17:18 through 20. It goes back to those biblical ideas that were preserved in a miraculous way in England, story for another day, but how they came to be preserved in the pages of English law, which will become English common law, which will then be revived during the time of the Reformation as people, remember in the Reformation, we just came through Reformation Day and celebrated sola scriptura, right? The opening of God's word and looking for the principles, the unchanging principles of truth that must apply to every area of life, including civil government. And so these ideas about how civil government was to look were recovered during the time of the Reformation. And y'all, as it happened, in God's providence, those were the years just before the planting of colonies in America. Colonies that would bring that English common law rooted in biblical principles, and then experience the refreshing of the Reformation, that time of really opening God's word and standing on what they knew was true, and then being given the opportunity to birth a nation that they never anticipated. So we thought we were going to be faithful English colonies always, but in God's providence, a new nation would be born. And it is unique because it built a civil government on the foundation of those biblical ideas of representation, voluntary consent, local self-government, an overarching constitution to which everyone was accountable, right? And the Electoral College is part of that system. So bottom line, that's why it's important, is because its roots are in a biblical understanding of man and government. Now, the founders knew that representative government was a great safeguard of individual liberties. It was a check and a balance between the two most frequent occurrences of civil government form, the tyranny of the one at the top or the tyranny of the mob, right? And what they gave us was that thing that holds those two extremes in check. And it's a hard thing to maintain, which explains why it's under attack today, right? But what they gave us was a constitutional republic. They gave us a system where there was an unchanging standard that was above everybody, including civil government. And it was a system that required voluntary consent, representation, and local self-government. So a constitutional republic. And guys, again, anytime you hear the word republic, understand that that's choosing representatives to rule over you. So that's what you have. It's a very good thing. What we are not is a democracy. And you've probably heard that term tossed around a lot. We need to save democracy. We're saving democracy. We're saving our democracy. We are not a democracy. But there is an agenda behind using that term repeatedly. A democracy, in fact, is the tyranny of the mob. It's not the tyranny of the one. It's the tyranny of the mob. But let me get to that. So in a pure democracy, I want to be sure you understand, rule is by 51%. 51% of the total popular vote, that's what we call it, of all the qualified voters. So let's say you're in a classroom. And today we're just voting on lunch, right? And I have a classroom of 20 students and 11 want Chick-fil-A for lunch and 9 really want a McDonald's today. So we're going to Chick-fil-A. How many classrooms actually go out for lunch? But anyway, you get my point. Y'all, it's one thing And even there, I would say that the mob thwarted the will, of 9 of the students, right? But sometimes we do have to come to some kind of a decision and we take a vote like that. Well, it's very different in civil government. So civil government is a special thing. It's been given the sword by God. Only one sphere. The family doesn't hold the sword, the church doesn't hold the sword, individuals don't, the civil government holds the sword. And so God has prescribed in the scripture what its jobs are. And so you want to be really careful that, number one, it's only doing the jobs it's supposed to, it's only making decisions about that, and that it's not making those decisions based on what 51% of the people think should happen with the sword. That is very dangerous. Why? Because God knows, same, and it's also very dangerous to have one person at the top that's making all those decisions. You don't want the tyranny of the mob with 51%, and you don't want the tyranny of one. Why? Because who are we? What does God say we are? We're black-hearted sinners. And the founders understood that. And so choosing the wisest, best representatives from among ourselves was a safeguard against the sinful heart of man. Again, it's a biblical understanding of man, who he is, and government. Man is an individual who should have his individual liberties protected. And so, yes, they understood that. They didn't want him to be part of this, once viewed as part of a big amalgamation of people, that he was just one of many. He was just a cog in the machine. He's not that. He's an individual created by God with unique abilities designed to glorify God, but also a black-hearted sinner. And that men tended towards those sinful activities and greed. And so that's, again, why that's why they purposefully avoided this idea of pure democracy or making decisions by 51% of the popular vote. So I digressed a little bit. The popular vote is the total votes of all the qualified voters in a particular election. So are we going to have a popular vote on Tuesday? Yes, you're going to see that count, because we can get it today. We can know what the popular vote is. So we will, but that is not how our election for president will be decided. And that's a good thing. Okay? Because if you can convince 51% of the people, then you would get what you get. And again, because we tend towards sin, this was a protection put in place that we were to choose representatives as this middle ground, hopefully the wisest and best among us, to make decisions and set policies in places that would be most aligned with the biblical ideas of government. Right, I digressed. Thomas Jefferson had an opinion about democracies. He said a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. How right he is. Benjamin Franklin put it another way, a little more humorously. He said, democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Is that fair? Of course not. But he did say liberty is the well-armed lamb contesting the vote, recognizing the importance of the Second Amendment to the maintenance of liberty, that you must have the ability to resist biblically when tyranny is expressed in your nation. So what the founders put together, the founders who put together the Constitution, were men who were representing 13 independent and individual states with individual interests, varying sizes, unique economies, different national heritages. In other words, immigrants kind of congregated in certain states, so they had different ethnic backgrounds, different religious expressions of Christianity. They were all Christians, but we had different expressions in different places. And so they were very concerned that their individuality not be sacrificed on the altar of union, right? We wanted to form a union, but preserve local self-government. Again, y'all, pulled from the pages of scripture and traditionally had come down through English law, and been refreshed by the ideas of the Reformation. So they see us as a union of states, with most of the power delegated to those states and the local governments within them, the hundreds, 50s, and 10s, right? The counties, the cities, etc. They knew it was very important to maintain local self-government, or what we call sovereignty of the states. State sovereignty was paramount. That's why you see the 10th Amendment, that unless it's stating, and I'm paraphrasing, that unless a duty or an authority is specifically granted to Washington, D.C., if it's not, then it stays with the states. Okay? So the 10th Amendment was a vivid expression of this idea of preserving local self-government and the sovereignty of the states in order to protect the unique interests of the people in those states from being dominated by a central government top down in Washington, D.C. The founders never, in their wildest dreams, viewed our nation as one big mass of Americans like you see on the left, who would just be ruled by whatever 51% of those people decided. No, what they saw us, how they viewed us, was what you see on the right, that each state had individuality, had individual interests, and that the government should be established at the local level, that almost all civil government function should be held there. Again, not in Washington, D.C., and the decision-making power and representation should all be established there at the local level. In fact, at that time, if you were talking about the freedom and prosperity that was enjoyed in America, what you would say is the United States of America are free and prosperous. Now, that probably sounds a little funny to our ear, because we would say today, oh, the United States of America is free and prosperous. Do you see the difference? They thought of us as many states, sovereign states, who had joined themselves together voluntarily, but retained governing power at the local level, sovereign states, that we are states, not the United States is one big thing. Okay, that's not how they thought of us. So even the way that we speak today reflects a change, a tragic change in our worldview. Now, one of the ways that your founders, in establishing our system of government, one of the ways they protected those smaller states from being dominated by the larger ones was in the House of Representatives, or excuse me, in Congress. They established two houses. And you all probably remember this if you studied some civics, right? We have a House and a Senate. The more populous states, the ones that have more people in them, have more representatives in the House. There are 435 total members, and you have a larger percentage that's given to you if you have a larger population in your state. So the 435 doesn't change, just the assignment of those seats. And it's determined by the census, which is taken every 10 years. So you guys, in the last presidential election in 2020, at that time, Florida had 27 representatives in the House. After the census in 2020, and then the election took place, but now we've been reapportioned. And because of the growth in our state, we now have 28 representatives in the House. So we've gained a seat. Now, every state is equally influential. Oh, I was going to show you that actually. Here's a map. So here we are in our 28 congressional districts. So depending on where you live, I know many of my students live in Central Florida or down in the Tampa area, a few over here on the East Coast. I'm up in the 5th district, but there are 28 districts, and we have one representative for each one of those districts. So up here in the 5th district, currently my representative is John Rutherford. But in New Mexico, for example, a fairly large state, but not much population. So your representation is not determined on your square mileage, it's your population, which makes sense, right? You're representing people. So in the House, they only have 3 seats because of the population in New Mexico. But in the Senate, as you probably know, every state is represented equally. Every state has 2 senators. But the 2 sides of the legislature, the House and the Senate, must come to an agreement in order for laws to pass. This was the system of checks and balances that was put in place, again, to protect smaller states from being overrun by the will and priorities of larger states. So the 2 houses must agree. And The system we use to choose our president is designed to do the same thing. It protects the interests of all of the states and maintains influence at the local level. So I'm going to explain that. But you should know that where you find all the details is in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, and also in the 12th Amendment. Our system is called the Electoral College. So the Electoral College gives individual states more influences, particularly states that have smaller populations. At the time, the concern was that major population centers like Richmond in Virginia or Philadelphia or New York would control the destiny of the whole nation. That is why this Electoral College system was designed, so that population centers, big urban cities, wouldn't determine the course for the entire nation. Y'all, if we had a direct national election where just 51% of the people decided everything, it would essentially eliminate state borders. And it would allow your presidential candidates to focus on just a few places where they could run up their numbers in the high population areas that favored them. So for example, you see my image that I gave you before of the collective, of looking like instead of having state boundaries, we were just this big mass of people. Well, the truth is, if we looked at it like that, we wouldn't really look like that, where people are just distributed evenly across the United States. Like the map I showed you of New Mexico earlier, no, some states have very little population, but those people deserve to live the way that they want to live and not be dominated by New York or by Miami, right? So over on the right, that map shows where the population is across the United States. So if it were just a direct popular election, where do you think presidential candidates would be campaigning? Well, they wouldn't care a thing about what happened here in what's often called the flyover states. They wouldn't care much about Idaho, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, New Mexico, any of that. They would concentrate here in the New England states, in Florida, on the West Coast in California, right? And those people's priorities would be what would dominate national politics. Think of it like this. We're in football season, so think about the National College Football Championship that will be coming up eventually. Well, it's not determined by the number of total points scored by your favorite team, is it? Your team has to win individual contests against other schools. For example, Clemson's football team doesn't get to play all their games for the season and just add up their total points and compare that to the total points scored by Auburn. Because if that were the policy, it would discourage real competition in each one of the games. Clemson would just make sure they really ran up the score on Kent State, right? But maybe if they're playing Miami and it's a tough game, they may not fight for the win because they just need to get a certain number of points and not let Miami get too far out there, okay? So if the score's low and it's, 7-6, well, as long as we can keep it to 7-6, we don't really care if we win. We just got to stay, we just need 6 points on the board and not let Miami run away with it. So y'all, we don't do it that way in football, and we don't do it that way for a reason, because it doesn't really show the merit of the teams if we were to do it that way. Instead, those teams have to get the W, right, in as many games as they can against strong opponents. Well, that's the way the Electoral College is designed as well. It keeps the candidates from running up the score in just a few areas that favor them, and forces them to actively compete and to go talk to and address the unique interests of the voters in small states and large states across the nation. We would probably not be talking so much about fracking if you didn't have to win the Rust Belt states and Pennsylvania. We wouldn't be talking about coal mining if West Virginia, with 4, I think, Electoral College votes, were not so vital. Okay, so some of the things that we really need to be talking about that influence all of America in important ways, but they're particularly of interest to some of the small states with just a few Electoral College votes, which we'll get to in a second. And our candidates would not have to go there and address those folks. They'd be left behind if we had a direct popular election. So how does it work? Well, guys, again, what we don't do is a direct election through a popular vote. Remember, the popular vote in the presidential election is the total votes of all the qualified voters in the whole United States. Now, we'll know that number, and I should have put this is a fake number down here. We don't have that many votes cast. But anyway, let's say that we know that number and we will know that number eventually, but we start to see those numbers come in, and the Democratic candidate has 139 million, I put here, so 139 million votes. No. The Republican candidate has 145 million, so who wins? We don't know yet. That does not tell us, okay? So the Democratic candidate could still be the winner, even with the popular vote looking like that, and that's a good thing, okay? The Republican candidate does not necessarily win because they have more popular vote. We don't do who got the 51%, okay? We are not a democracy, and the Electoral College system is a brilliant safeguard for state sovereignty, for protecting small states, for retaining local self-government and voluntary consent. So instead of a single national election, a mass action, what we have is a two-step process. Here's what it is. On election day, this year, that's going to be Tuesday, November 5th. There's going to be a separate popular election for president, but it's held in each one of the 50 states, okay? So on election day, separate popular election will be held here in Florida. There'll be one in New Mexico, Massachusetts, and all the 50 states. So in Florida, it is going to be, we're going to add up all of the mail-in ballots that have been received up to that point. They're legal. We're going to add up all the early votes, like mine, that day, and all the people who voted by 7 p.m. that night. Okay, so all of those will be tallied, and people primarily will have voted for the Republican Donald Trump for president or the Democrat Kamala Harris for president. And of those votes, whoever does get 51% in Florida will win all of our electoral votes, which again, I'll get to in just a second. Okay? So that's the popular election that takes place, but it's a different popular election in each state, not a big mass. So track with me. Then the second part of that is that the electors, the states, they've now determined who their winner is. So we'll determine who our winner is, and then our state will cast our assigned electoral votes. Officially, we do that on December 17th to elect the president. So legally, it is a two-step process. What are electoral votes? All right, so you guys, in the summer before the presidential election, each major political party in the state, in our state, it's Republicans and Democrats, they choose a group of people that will serve as what are called electors. If their party's candidate wins the majority of the state's popular vote on election day. Every state is granted the same number of electors that it has in what's called their federal congressional delegation. So that's what goes in this blank, congressional delegation. Each state is granted the same number of electors that it has in its federal congressional delegation. And that means your representatives plus your senators equals the number of electors that you have. For Florida, we have 28 representatives. We have 2 senators, so we'll have 30 electors. I popped their pictures in here. This is my representative and our 2 senators. Now, y'all, the Electoral College is the entire group of electors representing all the states, and that Electoral College casts their votes. That's the second part that happens. That happens on December 17th. Now, they don't gather physically as a group on that day, and we will already know, hopefully we will know on election night what's going to happen on December 17th, but it officially happens on December 17th. Now, clearly, if we back up a bit, a state's representation in the Electoral College is largely determined by population. Do you follow me? Your Electoral College number is mostly impacted by the number of representatives you have. And that's determined by your population. So it's most affected by that. And that's fair, that's right. But the small states are not left out in the cold because they are guaranteed always 3. There are 2 senators, plus they all have at least 1 representative in Congress. So small states are guaranteed 3 electoral college votes. So they have a slightly disproportional influence, and that's good. We want them to have a little more influence than they would have if it was just population based. That protects the smaller states. It gives them some pull that they need to protect their interests and that of their people. Guys, this year, this is the Electoral College map. So this is what's on that blank tally sheet that's the last page of your note sheets and what you can use on election night to track the results. So here you see how many Electoral College votes each state has. And you may have already observed Florida is very significant, but California has the most with 54. Texas is 40. Florida is 3rd with 30, and New York 4th with 28. In the last presidential election, New York and Florida actually had the same number of Electoral College votes. Both had 29. But New York, because of the census, so people left New York, people moved to Florida. So they lost a seat in Congress. We gained a seat in Congress, and that's reflected in our Electoral College influence. So they now have 28 Electoral College votes. Florida has 30. Now, in order to win the Electoral College, the candidate must have a majority of the electoral votes. So let's do the math and figure out, well, how many of these must you win in order to win the presidency, win in the Electoral College? So how many are there out there? Well, we have the total number of people in the House. Y'all remember what that was? So it's 435. Plus you've got 2 senators per state. So that's 100. And then the District of Columbia has been granted 3 electoral votes. So if you add all that together, you get 538. There are some websites, and you'll hear people talking about 538, 538. 538 is the number of votes in the Electoral College. So if you're going to win the Electoral College, you've got to win it by 1. You've got to win half plus 1. So to find the majority of the Electoral College, you just divide that in half. 269. Add 1, 270 is what wins the Electoral College. That's what you have to get to win the presidency. But guys, it's so hard to get there if you just focus on the big states or just one area or region of the country. And that's a good thing, right? Just like you can't run up the score on Kent State, candidates for president are forced to consider the concerns of all parts of the country. If we look at the current projections on Electoral College map, I just pulled this off the internet today. It's from Real Clear Politics, which is a group that takes polling data and puts it all in one place. And so if you look here, this is what they think is going to happen on election night. And clearly the gray means we don't know. So if you look at this, it's either camp, the Trump-Vance ticket, or the Harris-Walz ticket. Have either one of them secured enough? Do they think, based on polling, has either one of them secured enough to win the Electoral College? No, they have to win other states. So this is 219 is everything you see that's reddish, that's pink and darker red and deep red. And 211 is everything that you see over here. So looking at this map, and the gray are the ones that are, battleground swing states, if you will. I shouldn't say that. They're battleground states. Battleground states. I don't think I have anything else to add on this. No. But looking at Florida, Florida is not firmly red, is it? It's here. It's in what's called leans red. So we have very significant political real estate that we're sitting in right now. Again, candidates can't win just paying attention to the large states. That's not enough, because you see where they are, even if we count the large states, which are all committed, right? New York, California, Texas, Florida, they're all committed. That you can't win with that. They have to have a winning combination of the small and large states to put them over the top. Now, of all of the, I shouldn't have called it a toss-up, but the leanings, whatever, that's in play right now, Florida is the second biggest prize. So of all the ones that say they're leaning, of the top 4, the ones that are leaning are the 2 that are leaning Republican, Texas and Florida. So we're the second biggest prize in the leaning category. That means that if you're a Floridian watching this, you're living in one of the most valuable pieces of political real estate in the United States. But the sad part is that only 14 million of about 18 million adult Floridians who are eligible are registered. And of the ones that are registered, we're probably going to have good turnout, but good turnout is like 75%. So only 75%, if 75% come and vote, then that's 10.5 million, which means that about 63% of the eligible adults in this state decide for everybody, and maybe even for the whole nation, how the vote goes, who the president will be. Y'all, voting is a sacred duty. It is an honor, but it is a duty. It is a responsibility that has been given to us. Choose from among yourselves. Samuel Adams said, "Let each citizen remember at the moment he's offering his vote that he is not making a present or a compliment to please an individual, or at least that he ought not so to do, but that he's executing one of the most solemn trusts in human society for which he is accountable to God and his country." We are not voting because we like a person, because we think that they're funny, because we think that we would like to sit down and have dinner with them. We are looking at their policies and how those things will impact us and our neighbors, and will they advance us or protect biblical principles in our local sphere, but also are they advancing what is a biblical principle of civil government? So we must consider those things, and then we have a duty and a responsibility to go and vote for that candidate. It is a way of loving our neighbor when we do that, and so I'm probably preaching to the choir here, to go and cast your vote. Now, some parts of this process are going to differ slightly by state, but 48 states do it the way we do in Florida, and here's what should happen on Election Day. Remember, each major party has already chosen 30 people who will serve as electors if their party's candidate wins in Florida. So by 7 p.m. on Election Day on Tuesday, November 5th, all the legal registered voters in our state will have had the opportunity to cast their votes through early voting, mail-in, whatever. In-person voting will close, and any ballots that come into the supervisor of elections office in your county after that time will not count. When all the votes in each of our 67 counties are reported by the supervisor of election in that county, it's when all the counties have reported that our Secretary of State in Florida, his name is Cord Bird, he will certify the results. Here he is with our current governor, Ron DeSantis. Once he certifies the results, we know, and this is the official process, he'll certify the results, and that establishes the winner, either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. The electors for the winning party, either the Democrat slate of electors or the Republican slate of electors, those 30 people will be notified. And on December 17th, 2024, which is the deadline date set by Congress, that those 30 go to Tallahassee and ceremonially cast their ballots. And they are actual physical ballots that are then sent to Washington, D.C., and they are counted, physically counted, by the President of the Senate on January 6th, 2025. And again, y'all, largely this is ceremony, okay? Because of technology today, we usually know who the states have voted for on election night, like right down to the county level. So we have the technology today to be able to get to that granular level and know exactly what's going on. But this year, once again, it may get complicated. Some states have made changes in their election processes, particularly in how they use mail-in or how they accept mail-in ballots. So mail-ins are supposed to be in and countable by election night when polls close. But some states have been making exceptions, and there are legal battles going on right now to determine whether to count those ballots. We have historically known the winner of the presidency on election night. Almost always have we known. But we have some swing states. What's a swing state? A swing state is one of those where we don't know, one of those gray ones that was on the map. but it's also one where it's so close, and those that have done the math know that that state particularly is likely to push the election in one way or the other. So that's why they call it a swing state. They're very important. So Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, those are all considered swing states. And they've all announced that they might not be finished counting their votes for several days afterwards. This brings up some anxiety amongst voters. Why? Because in the last election in 2020, there were many charges that there were dishonest practices in effect. There was a lot of evidence presented. And because of that, millions of Americans are very concerned about whether we're going to have a fair election process. So you need to know, as you've got your little tally sheet out on November 5th, that there's likely going to be many examples of election problems reported by average voters with their cell phones, by poll watchers in polling locations, by lawyers who are watching the process. So all of it could lead to legal battles that prevent a clear winner from being declared on election night. Y'all, we need to pray that that's not the case, that we have a very clear and decisive election. That is what's going to be best for both sides, is to know definitively who the winner is and to know it quickly. So we need to be praying for that and that there would be peace in our nation. But you also should know, if Electoral College results are close, that there probably will be lawsuits that demand recounts in the states where the vote was close and it could make a difference. Now, all states have to declare their Electoral College votes by December 17th. So if we still have even one swing state that's still uncounted, still has not certified their results, it's possible that Trump nor Harris would have reached the 270 number. In that case, the decision would be taken to the House of Representatives, who are those would all be newly elected. Well, some of them might be reelected, but we're electing our House. So this newly elected House of Representatives would actually make the decision. Now, that has not happened since this image that I'm showing you in 1876 with Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. So obviously, that would be another source of tremendous political drama. And finally, though it is unlikely, the legal challenges that could be raised to the constitutionality of certain states and their election practices could put the decision in the hands of the Supreme Court, where again, it would cause great dissension, I imagine, across the country. But I tell you that not so that you worry, no, rather so that you pray. Because we're told what to do in situations like this. 2 Chronicles 7:14 clearly tells us, if my people, these are the believers in this nation, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I'll hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Y'all, I'm appealing to you and I'm preaching to me. This is what's needed in this moment. We need to do our duty. We need to go to the polls. We need to vote biblical values. We have a duty to do that. But we also have been told what we are to do. In years past, our nation had days of fasting, prayer, and humiliation. Today, we sometimes fast and pray, but there's very little humiliation. And that's the humbling of ourselves, the asking the Holy Spirit to show us the sin that needs to be repented of in our own lives. And so I'm appealing to all of us, those who are called by his name, to do that and to ask for God's mercy on our country. The chart that you have, I wanted to explain to you real briefly, the 270 to win chart. Y'all, as results begin to come in on election night, for example, likely we're going to see New York go for Harris Walt's ticket. There are 28 Electoral College votes that are there in New York. And so you'll put the state, New York, the 28 votes that have been earned, and the tally, 28. And then likely Florida will go Trump. And so 30 electoral votes would go in their column, with the tally being 30. As results continue to come in Massachusetts, likely it will go for Harris and Waltz. 11 Electoral College votes gives you a tally of 39. And West Virginia, which I mentioned earlier, a little state, but an important one, will likely go Trump. 4 Electoral College votes would bring the tally to 34. And you can continue to do that and to color in your states, traditionally Republican states red, Democrat states blue, just color them in on your map as the votes come in throughout the evening. Until, of course, somebody gets to 270. Charles Finney in 1868, a very troubled time in our nation as we were in the aftermath of the Civil War, said this: Christians seem to act as if they thought God didn't see what they do in politics. But I tell you, he does see it. And he'll bless or curse this nation according to the course they take. I'm encouraging you, once again, if you haven't done it already, go and vote. Encourage your compatriots, encourage your family and your friends and church members to go and to vote for biblical values in this election season. God sees it. But at the end of the day, we trust God with whatever the results may be. We ask for his mercy, though we don't deserve it. We go and cast our ballots. We choose, as we've been blessed to do. That duty is ours, but we remember the results are God's, and we can trust him with those results. If you want any more information, I've piqued your interest in the Electoral College. There are a couple other sources I wanted to recommend. Both PragerU and Hillsdale College have great videos you can find on YouTube to understand even more about how the Electoral College works. I think that's all I have to say on this subject. So you all, I'll be praying, you be praying, and we'll talk again after the election.